Hi friends, my name is Baji. Welcome to our channel. In our latest video, we talked about the JMeter user interface. It is recommended to understand the JMeter user interface before deep diving into different JMeter architecture elements. If you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend watching it first and then continuing this video. In today's video, we will deep dive into some of the commonly used JMeter architecture elements, and they are test plan, threads, samplers, and listeners. So without any further delay, let's get started. So let's open the JMeter by going into Apache JMeter bin folder. Double click the jmeter.bat if you are using Windows, and if you are using Linux or Mac, you can use the jmeter.sh, which will open the JMeter user interface. So when you open the JMeter, by default you can see an element called test plan. So this is the default parent element and it will automatically created by the JMeter. All other elements like thread groups, samplers, assertions, etc. can be added as a child under this test plan element. Unlike other elements, it is not possible to remove this element, and the test plan can be saved as .jmx file. So let's click on the save button. I have a folder created on my desktop called JMeter scripts, and I'm going to all my JMeter scripts into that folder. So let's say demo 1. We can also use this test plan to run it in non-GUI mode. So we will discuss more about non-GUI mode in the upcoming video sessions. Now let's look at some of its configuration options. So on the right hand side, you can see all the different configuration options available for test plan. So we have name field. By default, the name of the test plan will be defined as test plan, and we can use this name field to define meaningful name to the test plan. So let's say you can say as demo test plan, anything whichever is more meaningful to you while developing these scripts. Okay, and then you can also add some comments about this test plan for future reference purposes. Next, we have user defined variable section. If you want to configure some common parameters across all the samplers, then those can be configured in this section. For example, if you want to configure URL and environment, which you will be using in all the subsequent samplers, so you can add them here by clicking add button, so which will open an empty name and value field. So let's type URL and put some value, and I'm just putting the google.com just to explain the user defined variable section. Okay, and then let's add another name, environment, and performance testing. So in the subsequent sampler, if you are using URL and environment, instead of using the hard coded values, you can use this user defined variables. So that way tomorrow if there's a change in the URL, you don't need to go to all the samplers and change the value. You can go to the test plan and then change in one place. Okay, you have also an option to delete any user defined variables. You can click by deleting them. So JMeter will permanently delete those user defined variables. Just make sure that before you delete, you are not using these variables in any of your script. Okay, and then you also have up and down to move the user defined variables order. Let's say if I want to move environment to up, if I click up, then it will move the variable. And also the same, like if you want to bring it down, then you can also use the down button. Since we are not going to use these variables, let's delete them. Okay, let's say if you have multiple thread group elements defined in the test plan, by default those thread group elements will be executed parallelly. If your requirement is to execute them one after another, then you can choose the run thread group consecutively option, one at a time. So when you select this option, and in your script if you have multiple thread groups, those will be executed sequentially. Next one, run tear down thread groups after shutdown of main threads. We have a special type of thread group element called tear down thread groups. So if you go to test plan, right click add thread, and then there is a special type of thread group called tear down thread group. Okay, so the primary purpose of this thread group is to perform post actions like bringing the system back to the default state. The behavior of this thread group element is same as normal thread group. The only difference is that this element will only run after the regular thread groups, and it won't run if the test gracefully shut down. Okay, if you want to run this type of thread group after the main thread group, then you need to select this checkbox. So then only after main threads, JMeter will execute whatever we have defined inside this tear down thread group. Okay, and the next option we have here, functional test mode. So we can also use JMeter to perform some functional testing mode. Basically in this mode, JMeter stores information about the request and response, which may consume additional memory. So it is not recommended to select this option during the performance test. So they also given some note here, selecting the functional test mode may adversely affect performance. So when you want to debug something, you can use this mode, but for actual performance testing, we should not select this option. Okay, for testing your application, if there are some jar files dependencies, then you can add them by selecting the browse. So that will add those jar files in the test plan. So whenever you run the test, it will make use of those jar files. Okay, so this is all about the default test plan element. Now let's look at get the next element, which is threads. So you can add thread elements by right clicking the test plan, go to add and then threads. By default we can see 4 different types of threads elements. So the commonly used one is the thread group. So let's add the thread group. So this is the first element that needs to be added to the test plan during the script development process. Basically thread groups are used to create threads. Here the threads are nothing but virtual users. We can use thread groups to simulate the number of required virtual users when executing the performance test. We can also think of thread group as a script, and we can have multiple thread groups to test different scripts under a test panel. For example, you can also add another thread group, right? So you can have multiple thread groups. Each thread group can be treated as a script. So if you run the test in this current setup, by default all thread groups will execute parallelly, and you can control the execution order by going to the demo test plan and then selecting the run thread group in case if you want to execute them one after another. Okay, now let's look at the configuration options of this thread group. So same like test plan, this thread group also has name and comments fields, so you can use these fields to give some meaningful information about the thread group. So we have some options available under action to be taken after a sampler error. So these options decide how the script or thread group to proceed in case of any errors in samplers. The first one is the continue. We can choose this option if we want to continue our test if there is an error. By default this option will be selected in the thread group. Okay, the next one is the start next thread loop. So this means it will stop the loop on this particular iteration and it will start the next iteration. The next option is stop thread. If you select this option, it will literally kill the thread. Then the stop test. This option will stop the test in graceful manner, and the stop test now, which will stop the test abruptly. So based on your requirement, you can select the required option. So by default the continue will be selected. Let's keep the by default value for now. Okay, next we have thread properties. So these are options used to configure the number of threads or users, how the users need to ramp up and how many iteration to be run, etc. Okay, so the first one is the number of threads or users. So here we specify the number of users for the particular script. Let's say if you want to run your script with 10 users, so you can specify the number of threads as 10. Then ramp up period. So the ramp up period will be specified in seconds. So this will be used to configure the ramp up duration of the threads. Here ramp up means the gradual increase in the number of users or threads accessing the application over a specified period. This gradual increase mimics real user scenarios where user activity ramps up gradually rather than hitting the peak load instantly, right? So let's say if you define ramp up as 20 seconds, that means in 20 seconds all 10 users are going to hit the application. So the formula is ramp up period divided by number of thread users. That means 20 by 10, that means 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds one user start hitting the application. Please note that the first thread will always start directly. So if you configure one thread, the ramp up time is effectively 0. Okay, the next one, loop count. Here we will specify the number of iterations for each thread. Let's say if you want to run 10 iterations for each thread, then you can say here. So that means every user will run 10 iterations of this script. So in this example we have 10 users, so 10 into 10, so total 100 iterations will be executed. Okay, in case you want to loop infinitely, then you can use this infinite checkbox which will execute the script continuously, and you can control the number of iterations by defining the test duration. Okay, next we have same user on each iteration. This will be selected by default, so that means the cookie and cache data from the first sampler response are used in the subsequent request. If you are not selecting this option, then a new connection will be opened between iterations, which will result in increased response time and consume more resources like CPU and memory. Next we have delay thread creation until needed. By default, all threads created when the test starts, and then they pause for the appropriate portion of the ramp up time. If this option is selected, threads are created only when the appropriate portion of the ramp up time has elapsed. This is most appropriate for the test with a ramp up time that is significantly longer than the time to execute a single thread. We can also let the test run for some specific duration by selecting the specify thread lifetime. So here in duration you can specify how many seconds you want this test to be run. So let's say if you want to run for 1 hour, that means 3600 seconds. So when you are using the duration option, make sure that you are selecting the loop count as infinite, so that JMeter will calculate the number of iterations to be run during this duration. Okay, and then we also have startup delay. So we can use this option to delay the test start. So JMeter will calculate the start time based on this configuration. Let's say you want to run test after 1 hour, then you can say 3600. So the moment you run the button, JMeter will not start the test immediately. It will delay the test for 3600 and then only it will start the test. Okay, so these are all different thread group configuration options available for us. Based on our requirement, we can choose the appropriate option and then execute the test. So the next element that we are going to deep dive is sampler. Sampler elements are used to send the user request to the server by using the respective protocol. This is the actual thing that is doing the work by sending the traffic to the server. In JMeter we have so many samplers available. For example, if you right click thread group add sampler, you can see there are different types of samplers. For example, HTTP request sampler is used to send requests to the web server, and then FTP request sampler is used to download or upload the request to FTP server. Similarly, JDBC request sampler is used to send a SQL query to a database, and SMTP sampler is used to send mails using SMTP or SMTPS protocol, and JSR223 sampler, we can use this sampler to write some Groovy scripts. Okay. In real time, most of the times we will be testing the web applications or APIs. So in this video, we will deep dive into HTTP request sampler. If you would like to understand the other sampler elements, you can go through the official documents by adding that element. For example, if you want to learn more about JDBC request, you can add that element first to the thread group and then right click the JDBC request and then go to help, which will open the JMeter official documentation of the JDBC requests. And then you can go through all the information provided here and learn about this sampler. Okay, so to practice the scripting or learn the concepts, we would need some sample applications, right? BlazeMeter has created some demo applications like e-commerce application, flight booking. We can make use of them and learn the JMeter concepts. So just go to the browser. demoblaze.com is for the e-commerce application, and then Blaze demo is for the flight booking applications. Don't worry, I will share this sample application URL in the description. Okay, so now let's add the HTTP request sampler. So you can again right click on the thread group, add sampler, and then select the HTTP request, which will add the HTTP request sampler. Basically, HTTP request sampler is used to send HTTP or HTTPS request to the server. In general, for web application, there will be more than one web request in the user action. So it will be difficult the HTTP request samplers. In such situations, we may record the script using the non-test elements like HTTPS test script recorder, or using some third-party plugins or some other applications. We can discuss the recording process in the upcoming video. For now, let's discuss the HTTP request sampler configuration options. Same like other elements like thread group or test plan, we have name and comment fields which can be used to configure the meaningful name for this request and also some comments about this request. Okay, so let's rename this HTTP request as homepage. Okay, and then you can add some comments like this is the demo Blaze homepage. Comments are not mandatory. This will just give you some additional information of this HTTP request sampler. Okay, in configuration options, we have two tabs, basic and advanced. In basic tab, we have a section called web server. So in this, we have different fields. The first one is the protocol. By default, JMeter will use the HTTP protocol to send the request to the server. If your application is using HTTPS protocol, then you need to specify that here. For example, HTTPS. Okay, and then the server name or IP. Here you can specify the server host name or IP address. For example, in our demoblaze.com applications, the server name is demoblaze.com. Then go back to JMeter, and then you can type the server name here like demoblaze.com. Port number, by default it will use 80 as a port number because that is the default port for HTTP protocol. If you are using HTTPS, then you need to specify 443. If your application is using different port number, then you can specify that port number here. Okay, next we have HTTP request section. In this section, first we will configure the method, whether it is get request, post request, put, or whatever the request that we are trying to send. Okay, so since we are trying to launch the demo Blaze homepage, it will be a get request. And then we have field called path. Here we will specify the path of the resource or page. Since in our example we are launching the demoblaze.com, we don't need to specify any path. Okay, and then we have content encoding. So this is the character encoding to be used, and it is not related to the content encoding in the HTTP request header. And then we have redirect automatically. If the application has some redirections, then this setting sets the protocol handler to automatically follow redirects so that they are not seen by JMeter and it will not also appear in the samplers. Okay, and follow redirects. This is the default option selected. With this option, JMeter will check if the response has any redirects. If so, it will follow it. For example, if you are selecting the redirect automatically option, then the follow redirect option will be disabled. Okay, you can only choose either redirect automatically or follow redirects. And then we have use keep alive setting, which is also selected by default. Basically, keep alive is a feature that allows for persistent connections between the client and the server. Using this feature, multiple requests and responses to be sent over a single TCP connection. Otherwise, the connection will be terminated by the server after serving the request. So this will create connection overhead and impacts the performance and latency, especially for websites with multiple resources to load. Okay, we have used multi-form data option. So for some specific post requests, we may need to set this option. And then browser compatible headers. So this suppresses the content type and content transfer encoding headers when you use the multi-form data option. Okay. For some requests, we may need to send the request with some parameters. In such situation, we can specify those parameters in the parameters tab. Like you can add the parameters by clicking the add button, which will create a new record where you can specify the name of the parameter and the actual value. And you can add multiple parameters as well. You can also specify the body of the request in this section. For example, when we are testing the API request, the developers will provide us the body of the request. So we can specify that body in this body data section. If you want to send file as part of the request, then you can add that in the file upload section. You can also specify the file parameter name in the parameter name and also the meme type. Here meme stands for multi-purpose internet mail extensions. Basically meme type categorize the data based on their nature. For example, if you are sending HTML web page request, then the meme type will be text/HTML. Similarly, if you are sending the request for JPEG images, then meme type would be image/JPEG. Okay. And in the advanced tab, we have client implementation section. Here we can specify whether we want to send the request using HTTP client 4 implementation or Java. So if you are specifying HTTP client 4, then it will use the Apache client implementation. And if you are specifying Java, it will be use the HTTP implementation provided by JVM. If you are not selecting anything, then it will depend on the HTTP request default setting in the jmeter.properties files. By default, it will use the HTTP client 4 implementation, and we can change this behavior by updating the respective value in the JMeter properties. Okay. Next we have timeout, connect and response, and this timeout should be specified in milliseconds. Okay. So if you specify connect timeout here, so JMeter will wait for connection to open that many milliseconds. Similarly, you can specify number of milliseconds to wait for a response. If you are not receiving the response within the given timeout millisecond, then the request will be timed out. Next we have embedded resources from HTML pages. So when we request HTML page, the page can have different resources like images, JS, CSS files. For example, go to the demoblaze.com website and then go to settings of the Google Chrome, select the more tools option and then developer tools. In developer tools, we have different tabs available. Go to the network tab and then try to reload the same page. So if you see here, we only try to launch the Demoblaze application, right? In the background, the browser is sending so many requests for different resources like CSS, JPEG, JavaScript. So if you want to see all these requests in JMeter, then you need to select the retrieve all embedded resources. So that will retrieve all the embedded resources of that page, if any. You can also control the parallel downloads by selecting the parallel downloads option. By default, it will try to download parallelly 6 resources. Okay. You can specify regular expression in URLs must match and URLs must not match, so that JMeter try to follow the conditions specified in this field while retrieving the embedded resources. And we have source address section. If you are using the HTTP request with the HTTP implementation, then you can specify the source address here. You can also specify device IPv4 or device IPv6 address as well. And if there is a proxy server, then you can specify the proxy server details in the proxy server section. And we have optional task section. By default, the response is stored in the sampler result. If you are testing the large amounts of data, it is recommended to select this save response as MD5 hash option, so that the JMeter will calculate the MD5 hash data and it will store that data. Here MD5 is nothing but message digest algorithm 5. Okay. So let's run the test with the basic settings. Okay. To start the test, you can click the start button here, or you can go to run and then click start button, or you can also use the Control R, which is a shortcut. Okay. Let's click the start button here. So we just executed the test, but we don't know what happened, right? So we can go to the logs and then see some information about the test, but this information is not that helpful for us to understand what exactly happened when we execute the script, correct? So in order to see the results, we need to add another another element called listeners. So that is our next element to deep dive. Okay, so basically listeners listens what is happening in the test and let you follow it, and it displays the test results. So we have so many listeners available in JMeter, and all of them will collect the same data. The only difference is how they are presenting it in the UI. Okay, so we can add the listeners in thread group level as well as the test plan level. If you are adding it in the test plan level, the same listeners will be used for all the thread groups. So let's add them to the test plan level. So if you want to add any listener to the test plan level, you just need to select the test plan and then right click add listeners. So you can see there are so many listeners, right? For now, add the view results tree. This is the most commonly used listener during the script development phase, and this view results tree must not be used during the load test because it consumes a lot of resources like CPU and memory. We should only use it either for functional testing or during our script creation, debugging or validation. Okay, so view results tree displays the results in the order generated by JMeter and show us all the different information. Same like other elements, we also have here name and comments to configure the meaningful name to the view results tree, and then we have write results to file or read from file. If you want to write all the results to a specific file, you can specify the file name here, or if you want to read also from a file, then you can specify the file name here. And then if you want to only write errors to that file, then you can check this errors option, or if you want to only write the successes, then you can select this option. We can also configure what are all the things that we want to write to that file here, right? By default, these are all the options selected, so you can uncheck or check the option based on the need. And if you execute the script with multiple HTTP request sampler, and if you want to find something, you can search using the search field here. And if the search is case sensitive, then you can also select case sensitive. And if you are trying to search using regular expression, you can also use the regular expression checkbox. And in this section, we will be seeing the different HTTP request sampler details. Okay, and upon selecting that HTTP request sampler, then we can see the sampler result, request and response data. So let's quickly start the homepage HTTP request sampler, which will send a request to demoblaze.com website, and then we can verify the results using view results tree. Okay, so let's start that. Now go back to view results tree. Now you can see one request, which is the homepage. When you select this, you can see the sampler result here, the thread name, and at what time the sampler starts, load time, connection time, latency. You can see so much of information, and also the response code 200. If you go to the request, it will show you what is the method that we have used and the URL. You can also see the request headers, and then if you go to the response, it will show by default the text, which is the HTML text of the page, and you can also see the headers. So HTTP 200, which is successful response, with some additional response headers. For example, if you want to see the response same like a web page, then you can use so you can also select the HTML page, which will show the response instead of simple text. It will show it in the HTML format. Okay, and you also have so many other options. We will go through them when we are discussing the specific topic. For now, we will go back to the text, and if you want to search something in the response, you can search in this box. For example, if I want to type user, then if I click find, it will show me all the text related to that user. Okay, and again here also we have case sensitive and regular expression to control the way we want to search the text. So right now, when we start this test, it only sends one HTTP request sampler, right? Because in the thread group, we only specify number of threads as 1 and the loop count is 1. For example, if you want to run the same test for 10 iterations, then you can specify the loop count as 10 and then go back to the view results tree, clear this result so that we will have the fresh results from the latest test. So let's start it again. So this time JMeter will try to send 10 HTTP requests to demoblaze.com and then gather all the performance metrics. Okay, so we also have another listener, which is view results in table. So let's clear the results again and then start the test. We can see the output in both view results tree as well as in the view results table. So if you see the view results table, the number of samples that JMeter sends to the demoblaze.com and the start time, thread group, and the HTTP request sampler name, sample time, how long it took, and the status. The green tick specifies the success, and the number of bytes it downloaded, number of bytes sent, latency, and then connection timeout. Since we have used the use keep alive setting, it did not create new connections. Okay, Sometimes the only average response time is not enough to understand the application performance. In such situations, we can also add another listener called aggregated report. Listener go to aggregate report, which will give some additional information like average, median, 90th percentile, 95th percentile, 99th percentile, minimum, maximum. So let's clear the results again and then rerun the same test. So here we can see we have executed 10 samplers of homepage. The average response time is 67 milliseconds and then median is 65 milliseconds. The 90th percentile is 68, 95th is 68, 99th is 146. Okay, here in the view results table we are seeing the individual sampler response time. In the aggregated report we got the aggregated information. Okay, in the aggregated report by default it will show 90th percentile, 95th and 99th percentile. We can modify this by updating the aggregate RPT PCT1 property in JMeter.properties. So go to bin folder and then look for JMeter.properties, open it some text editor. Here if you look for aggregate report, so this is the configuration. By default it is using 90, 95 and 99. So you can update here, for example I want to see 90th percentile instead of 95th. So I can update here and then uncomment this option, save it, and you need to restart the JMeter to take that configuration into effect. So go to file and then restart, open the file again. So we have one HTTP request which is homepage of demoblaze.com. So let's rerun the script. Now if you go to aggregate report, instead of 95th percentile you are seeing the 98th percentile. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you so much for staying till the end and supporting me. I hope you understand the JMeter architecture elements explained in this video. In case anything is not clear or require more detailed information, please feel free to mention it in the comment section. All the video notes have been uploaded in GitHub and you can find the link in the description. If you are new to our channel, please consider subscribing and also like and share this video so that others will also get benefited. I'll see you with the next video in this module. Until then, take care, stay safe and keep learning.